Google and Amazon are probably the only two Mag 7 companies that are actually kind of cheap right now. I'm going to go through their financials and come up with what I would estimate their owner's earnings to be. So when we go to Google, I like to go to the cash flow statement. We'll see here under cash from operations, they do $132 billion of cash from operations. I think that this is low. A lot of tech companies they like R&D expense for tech companies generally is actually should be reinvestment in the company. That's how it should be. Like it should show up in cash from operations, but because it's a tech company, it doesn't do that. The GAAP earnings are for like old companies like factories and stuff. But if we added back R&D expense to this cash from operations, it'd be a fairer metric for this company, I believe. So they do about 50 billion in R&D. Add that to the 132 billion that they do in cash from operations. And then they have stock-based comp of 23 billion. So let's just round that up, assume it's 32 billion. That way it makes the math easy. Their cash from operations would be about $150 billion if we subtracted the 32 from the stock-based compensation. So 150, that's likely their owner's earnings. So owner's earnings is like, it's like the percent that a company could yield, or it's like the earnings that a company could yield and maintain their cash flows. So this is assuming they just gave up on growing the company at all. I think that they could do about 150 billion of owner's earnings if we added back the R&D expense and then subtracted stock-based compensation. That's kind of how I like to think about these companies. So if we did 150 billion and we divided that by the market cap or the enterprise value of 2 trillion, let's see what that comes out to be. $150 divided by 2,000 equals. So their owner's earnings yield is roughly 7.5% right now, which is actually pretty good because if you look at the alternative, it's treasuries at 5% right now. For a company like Google that likely has more growth drivers than declining businesses in their portfolio, I'm thinking like Waymo and YouTube especially with this VO3 stuff that's coming out. I think YouTube's going to be a really big player. With TV, there's the production quality on YouTube is getting a lot better. Not this video, obviously, but some people have good production quality. So 7.5% owner's earnings yield, as far as I think about it. So it's pretty much you subtract to get this number for like a tech company, like this company in particular. You'd add back the R&D expense, subtract the stock-based compensation from their cash from operations, and then capital expenditure also. So if you want it to be really conservative, I would say 100 billion is a conservative owner's earnings. That'd be a conservative owner's earnings in my opinion. So let's do the math, see what that would be. 100 divided by 2,000, it'd be 5%. 5%, so you're getting a conservative metric. You're getting just as cheap as a treasury, which is a lot better than the stock market as a whole right now. Stock market as a whole right now is trading at like 30 times earnings, which would be at 3.3% cash flow margin, or not cash flow margin, cash flow yield. But like like a yeah. It is growing, I guess. The S&P would be growing. That yield would. And so, in my opinion, Google is pretty cheap relative to the market at a 5% cash flow yield. That'd be a conservative metric, allowing for growth probably. Anyways, let's go to Amazon now. Figure out what their owners' earnings are. Because it just makes it easier. If you find their owners' earnings, it just makes it easier to compare yields against treasuries or yields against like the S&P. S&P's at 3.3% and treasuries at 5%. So Amazon, let's see, what is their R&D expense? $90 billion of R&D. That's insane. Damn. Alright, if we go to the cash flow, cash from operations, $113 billion. Stock-based comp of $20 billion. Damn. So Amazon is kind of capital intensive, and so you probably can't negate all of their capital expenditures as, you gotta add backs, you gotta subtract some of that from your cash from operations. So if we added the 90 billion to the cash from operations, that would be about 200 billion of cash flow that they could be doing. And then I would subtract, say, 50. I think 50 is fair. They could maintain operations with half the capex, in my opinion, probably. Because if you look at them, they're growing like 10% a year right now. And it's because they're building out new facilities to, like warehouses and stuff. This is all just like rough. You gotta dig deeper into these companies if you actually want to invest in them. But this is just a good, quick way to think about it. Like finding their owner's earnings yield. And so 200 billion, and then you subtract about 50, I'd say, and then add back the R&D expense, which is way higher than the free cash flow. I get that, but their margins could be significantly higher. So that's like that's a bullish. I'd say 150 is probably like the upper limits of what they could do if they just wanted to cash flow their business at this point. So let's say 150 divided by, what's their market cap? 2.3. 20. So they're trading at about 6.5 times my estimate of what they could cash flow if they wanted to stop all growth initiatives and then just treat their company as like a bond. That's kind of how I like to think about these companies. I do think Amazon probably has a lot more growth potential than an Alphabet. Maybe. Maybe. They're about equal. Well, I don't know. I trust Amazon management a lot more than I do Google management. And so that, I would say that justifies, I'd say 6.5% earnings yield on Amazon stock, owner's earnings yield, is really good. That's really good relative to the market, which is about half of that. Yeah. And it's a lot higher than treasuries too. So these are pretty much the only two Mag 7 companies I would be investing in at this point. All the rest, maybe I just don't understand the businesses well enough, but these are the only two that actually have a good owner's earnings yield, in my opinion, that would outpace the market and then outpace treasuries as well. But yeah, everything's expensive, so there you have it.